Hi everyone. Today I'd like to talk about a study habit that I see a lot of students using that just isn't effective for their learning, especially in engineering or other STEM fields. Now that habit is reviewing your notes. Let me unpack that a little bit because there is a time and a place for this kind of review. But in order to understand what the real problem is, we're going to need to better understand how we learn to do technical things and why just reading or reviewing your notes won't help you with that. When we're learning to do technical things, like writing computer code or solving calculus problems, we need to be actively engaged in the act of doing those things. Think about how ineffective you would be at speaking a language if you just read books about that language all day. Maybe you read a bunch of grammar books, maybe you try to read the dictionary. But you never actually try to speak or communicate in that language in any way. You're just reading those books. You'd probably learn something. Reading does teach you things. You may even be able to speak a little bit of the language if you really tried, but it's not going to be an effective use of your time. Honestly, it's kind of a waste of time to do it that way. Instead, imagine if you took that time to spend reading those books and tried to make sentences, get feedback from native speakers, and correct your mistakes. Your initial progress might be pretty slow, but you'd be actively engaging your brain, making new connections, and eventually you'll learn a lot more in the same amount of time. That's how we learn technical things. That active engagement with the actual skills that we're trying to use is what's going to teach it. Technical things are skills-based, not necessarily knowledge-based. In a knowledge-based field where you just have to remember things and be able to recall them, sure, reviewing might be effective. But in a place where not only do you have to remember the thing, you also have to be able to do something with it, that's where you have to start actively engaging with the material you're trying to learn. So what is the problem with just reviewing your notes? When you review your notes, you're not reading. You're just highlighting things, maybe skimming over it, briefly summarizing, but you're not really doing that participation that you need to do. You're trying to develop not only the knowledge, but a technical skill, and this isn't going to help you to do that. It's important to understand that you aren't doing absolutely nothing. Reading your notes does have a place. We're going to talk about why and how in a bit. But you're just not using that study time as effectively as you could, and it will take you a lot longer to learn the same things than if you were to try some active engagement methods. The other problem is, honestly, it's really easy to feel like you're doing something useful by just reviewing. You have your notes open, you might have read it for 1 hour or 2 hours, but you're not really doing anything. You're not ignoring other things. Sure, you have your book open, you're trying their best. But it's not studying efficiently. And so if you can think about if you have 1 hour to study and you want to maximize the amount of learning that you can do, then you need a different strategy to fix that problem. Okay, so logically, if just sitting and reading on notes is inefficient, why do you take notes at all? Well, the answer has to do with what you actually should be using your notes for. They are useful for studying and learning and reviewing. Please don't get me wrong. Please take notes. But if you only have so much time to learn everything you need to do in a course, and you need to take care of yourself while you're trying to do all that learning, you have to maximize your learning as much as possible. And so you're going to use your notes in a much more effective way. I recommend using your notes for support rather than the first thing you reach for. Remember, we learn by being active in the process, so here are some strategies you can use to increase your studying efficiency. First, imagine as though you have assigned homework problems. Many courses do. Some don't, but you may have to go out and search in Google and try to find those homework problems. But the point is, try to start with problem solving where you can actually use that skills. Start actively practicing and keep your notes closed at first. Open up a problem and try to solve it without any help whatsoever. Now, if you're finding you can breeze through those problems easily, then you can start skipping ahead to more complicated ones. You don't need your notes, and if you don't have your notes open, you're actively using that knowledge you already have stored and just practicing it a little bit. Practice makes permanent, so if you've already got that knowledge, you just want to give it a little bit more of a boost. Okay, but now what if you get stuck? This is when your notes come in, and your textbook, and maybe asking the prof, whatever it happens to be. As you work on problems, at some point you're going to get stuck. If you're not getting stuck, then you're in really good shape and you just need to do a little bit of practice so you don't forget things. But if you get stuck, that's when you need to open your notes and not a minute before then. I also want you to make sure that you are really, truly stuck. Not just, I kind of need to think about this for a minute. More like, I have no idea what I'm even supposed to do here. When you do it this way, when you really get stuck, you don't know what you're doing, you're going to open up your notes. Now you're using your notes for maximum effect. You have a question, a specific question you need to answer. And so you're reading your notes actively, always asking, is this passage the one that answers the question? Or how does this passage help me to move forward in answering my question? You start to contextualize and actively use your notes for something much better. To top it off, you're also not just wasting your time by just reading your notes, you're searching for something. The final strategy I'm going to talk about is a little weird at first. It's called teaching to learn. You do get used to it. And as someone who does a lot of teaching, I've actually learned the most when I'm coming up with my notes and trying to explain them to students. One of the best ways to learn something is actually to teach it. Now, if you have classmates who are already struggling, then you should work together and take turns trying to teach each other what you're confused about. This again actively engages you in the process and causes you to think of new ways of communicating the information so that you internalize it for yourself. If there's no one around, whisper or talk to a mirror, film a video, or just write out a set of lecture notes and practice them in your head. The point is to move from just reading to contextualizing and explaining and again actively participating. So there are many more ways to maximize your time and to become more efficient in your study habits. Hopefully I'm going to post a few more of these videos. But if not, and if all you're going to be doing is looking through your notes, I really strongly encourage you to use some of the strategies we talked about in this video to maximize that study time you have.